None but the righteous, none but the righteous shall see God. Oh, 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 shall see God. None but the righteous, none but the righteous, none but the righteous shall see God. Oh, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. All right. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. I hope that you all are doing well. I hope that you have had at least a good rest. Today we are continuing our talk on moving in mastery, and today we're going to talk about suffering. Now this is again an exhaustive topic, so obviously I'm not going to cover everything, but we're just going to give you hopefully some helpful pointers and some helpful tips. I know that a lot of people right now see social distancing, right? And we see being told in certain ways to isolate or self-isolate or self-quarantine. Many people are seeing this as a form of suffering, right? There's all kinds of suffering, so we're going to get into it today. So what is suffering? Suffering has to do with an uncomfortable part of your life. I'm going to give you the official dictionary definition of suffering, and then we're going to go into talking a little bit about some processes and some ways to overcome suffering for some ways to deal with suffering for others. So what is suffering? Suffering is the state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship. That's the official definition, okay? It's the state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship. So some of us see suffering as an endless struggle. Some of us can classify suffering. Sometimes people classify it as you have first world problems versus having third world problems. A first world problem might be you're out of toilet paper right now. A third world problem might be you don't have any water and you have to walk several miles to go to a well to go get your water and walk back several miles just to make sure that your family has water every single day. First world problems, third world problems. All right. So let me give you 5 key points about suffering, and hopefully these will help us put some things in our life in perspective. Number 1, although many people try to avoid it, suffering is an unavoidable part of life. It touches everyone in one shape or another, one form or another. You can suffer through grief, you can suffer through loss, you can suffer through loneliness, you can suffer through, as the definition talked about, hardship. That can be a financial hardship. And you can suffer through pain. That can be an emotional pain. That can be a mental pain. That can be a physical pain. All right. So again, suffering is an unavoidable part of life. It is a part of the human experience. It is a part of what makes us human, that we can feel those ways, that we can suffer. Number two, there are periods of suffering. There are periods of suffering. For some, their periods are longer than others. But for the most part, it is an impermanent condition for most people. Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8 has a piece in there that gives us a time. It says it's a time to mourn and it's a time to dance. So there are periods of suffering in our life. Now, some suffering can be brought on by our own personal choices and decisions, and some suffering can be brought on by things that we have no control over. And then sometimes it can be a combination of the two. Number three, suffering can present you with opportunity. Suffering can present you with opportunity. Opportunity to do what, you say? I am in pain. I am dealing with grief. I am dealing with loneliness. I'm dealing with hardship. Why do you want to talk to me right now about opportunity? Because suffering can present you with lots of opportunity. It can present you with the opportunity to begin anew. It can present you with the opportunity to upgrade. It can present you with the opportunity to let go of some things. It can present you with the opportunity to reevaluate your life. We begin when we're suffering. I heard this quote and I found it to be true in my experiences of suffering, that sometimes God's voice becomes the loudest in our pain. And I know for me, when I went through several episodes and periods of suffering in my life, I tended to hear God more clearly during my times of suffering than outside of my times of suffering. And so I began to have periods where I could self-reflect. Some of the things you can ask yourself if you are suffering today is, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? Sometimes people enter into periods of suffering and their mind is so wrapped into the pain that they miss the lessons they're supposed to get. What can I learn from this? All right. What can it teach me about myself and others? What can it teach me about myself and others? How can it change me, or how can it change my direction or my course in life? Some people's suffering has literally changed the course of their life. It's made them have to turn and go in an entirely different direction. So how can it change me, or how can it change my direction in life? How can I adapt through this experience? How can I adapt through this experience? What about me needs to adapt? Does this suffering call for my environment, for me to adapt to my environment until I go through it? Does this cause me to adapt a new mindset as I walk through this? Am I going to be dealing with a new normal as I walk through this? Okay. Number 4, suffering can lead to transformation Suffering can lead to transformation and inner cleansing. Suffering can lead to transformation and inner cleansing. It can become a character builder. Now, it doesn't always do that for everyone. Again, some people not only go through the pain, but they let that pain take over their entire personality. They let that pain take over their entire character. And some people are shaped by their suffering in a negative way. They're never the same person after they go through that suffering. They may actually embody that pain, and they may walk around as a person who is filled with pain or filled with bitterness or filled with resentment. So their suffering did in fact change them, but it did not necessarily change them for their good. So suffering can lead to transformation. It can also lead to inner cleansing. It can become a character builder for you. It can build resilience in you. It can build courage in you. Some people discover that they're things that they never thought that they could do or accomplish, but they're doing them because they stepped and they moved past the pain and they began to build their character and develop their character. So it can build resilience in you. It can build courage in you, and it can build patience in you. Now, of course, we know there are some examples of suffering, and I won't go into them, but I encourage you to read the book of Job. When I was dealing with intense suffering, some brought about by my own choices, and some pieces of it I didn't have control over. Job was a great book to read through, to look at his life, to understand suffering in a more detailed way. But we're not going to do that this morning. But I encourage you to read the book of Job if you are dealing with suffering right now. Suffering can help you develop understanding of you. We're still talking about transformation. Here's the thing. You can control how you respond. You might not be able to control what happened to you. You might not be able to control the factors around it. You might not be able to control the person that was a part of whatever happened to you, but you can control how you respond. Here's something that came to me this morning that I thought was very powerful. I hope you will take it in and think about it and let it sit for a moment. But you can determine how you will interpret your pain. You can determine how you will interpret your pain. You can interpret your pain as, I deserve this thing to happen to me. And some people do that. They actually interpret their suffering as, this was meant to happen to me. I'm supposed to, this is my fault. Okay? Or you can interpret your pain as, this is an opportunity for me to learn something. Maybe it wasn't my fault. Not everything that happens to us is our fault. So you can determine how you will interpret your pain. You can internalize it and say, it was my fault, even if it wasn't your fault. But some people internalize and say, it was my fault. Or you can say, I'm in this, I'm in pain, I'm dealing with grief, I'm dealing with loss, I'm dealing with whatever it is, but I have an opportunity now to pivot. I have an opportunity now to transform. I have an opportunity now to shift my trajectory. What am I going to do differently? So you can determine how you will interpret your pain. You can even interpret your pain and say it's everybody's fault but yours. All right? But how you interpret your pain may decide how long you stay in it. It may decide whether or not you prolong your suffering by how you interpret your pain. All right? Lastly, as with anything with suffering, we can find ourselves in a place of denial. We can say, I can't believe this is happening to me. And you can stay in that place of denial and miss the opportunity to pivot and miss the opportunity to transform. So if you are finding yourself in a season of suffering, it is okay to acknowledge that this is what it is. I'm going through this. I lost this. I'm grieving this. I'm having this financial hardship. Now I've got to decide. I've got to respond. I've got to determine how I'm going to interpret what's happening to me. So I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to accept what it is that's happening. And then I'm going to adopt a new state of mind. I'm going to adopt a new mental attitude because that's important. And then lastly, whatever I'm going through, I'm going to find the purpose in it. I'm going to find the purpose in it. One of the psalmists said this in Psalm 119 and 50. I believe David, he said, "My comfort in my suffering is this. Your promise preserves my life. My comfort in my suffering is this. Your promise preserves my life." No matter what I am facing today, I know that the promises of God is what's preserving my life. I know that because God has promised me some things, I can stand on those promises and I can believe for a new day. I can believe for a new season. I know that there is something after this because God doesn't give us promises and then he says, "I'm going to close the door on your life." If he's given you a promise, that promise is there to preserve your life. That promise is there to give you a hope and a future. Because again, as we talked about before earlier, suffering, for the most part, for many people, has a lifespan. Sometimes we can't see the lifespan when we're in it, right? We're thinking, "Oh my God, this is taking forever. When am I going to get through this? When am I going to stop feeling this way? When is this pain going to ease up?" Right? But he says, "My comfort in my suffering is that your promise is preserving my life." Without the promises of God, we would feel as though life was not worth living, life was not worth going on, and life was not worth carrying on. But God gives us promises, and those promises preserve our life. The last thing we need to know is that God is with us in it. God is with us in it. Now, obviously, this may not resonate with everyone because there are people definitely who don't believe in a creator. Some people find their way to the creator in their suffering, but that's not always the case for everyone. But I am speaking as a believer. I am speaking as someone who has experienced the creator coming to sit with me in my pain. He never left me alone. People abandoned me in my pain at times, but he never left. He stayed right there. He sat with me in that distress. He sat with me in that discomfort. He sat with me in that pain. He sat with me in that grief. He let me cry. And then he gave me a promise. He let me cry. And then he said, "Daughter, it's going to be okay." He let me cry. And he said, "I'm still here." He let me cry. And he said, "I'll never leave you and I'll never forsake you." So if you allow him to, that's all we can do. That's all I can suggest to you today. If you allow him to, God will show himself. He will manifest himself and he will be with you in your suffering. 2 Corinthians 1:3 says, He comforts us in all our troubles, so that as we have been comforted, we can go and comfort others with the comfort that he has comforted us with. So no, your suffering is not purposeless. Remember, find the purpose in your suffering. Sometimes we're going through things and we have no clue what it is we're going through until we're on the other side of it. I can't tell you how many people my husband and I have encountered that when these people come and they tell us their stories, we look at each other and we're like, they're telling us the exact thing that we just went through. And now we have a solution for them. Now we have a strategy for them. Now we can encourage them and tell them that there's another side of what they are sitting in because we're on the other side of it. So sometimes he comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort others with the comfort that he provided to us. So yes, sometimes your suffering is not just to teach you a lesson, But sometimes your suffering is designed for you to be able to be equipped with an experience to pass lessons on to other people. And I know we don't want to hear that because, again, we really don't want to experience suffering. But sometimes God says, I'm going to choose Jarvis. I'm going to choose Benjamin. I'm going to choose Judy because I know that they will keep their trust in me through this experience. And I know I can count on them to be a good teacher in the end. Whew, I felt the Lord on that. Can God count on you to be a good teacher after you have suffered a while? I think I'm going to stop right there. Something to ponder. Can God count on you to be a good teacher after you have suffered a while? I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Moving in Mastery. We have one more session that we are going to do on tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. And I wish you a wonderful day, a peaceful day. Stay in faith, stay healthy, be kind, give where you can, help someone in your local vicinity, help your local hospital, donate to a relief fund, do something today to impact someone else in their time of suffering. Take care, everyone, and be blessed.